Could you ever believe you would be seeing the America you are seeing today? Gender confusion, open borders, cancel culture, defund police, socialism. The list could go on. In this week's podcast, we're going to talk about how we got there and what we can do about it. Stay tuned.
How do I bring my faith to work? How do I tap into the power of God in my work-life call? Why am I going through this adversity? Is God mad at me? I'm Oz Hillman, and I've been helping leaders like you answer these questions and more for over 30 years. That's what this podcast is all about. Let's learn and grow together. Welcome to TGIF, Today God is First. Are we winning or losing the cultural war? In this session, we're going to talk about what it means to be a cultural change agent in a dramatic season of change in our country and world. Let's look at some scriptural foundations for today's message. Colossians 1:16-18 says, "For by him all things were created, that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities and powers, all things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things consist. And he is the head of the body, the church, who is the beginning, the firstborn from among the dead, that in all things he may have preeminence." That is Colossians 1:16-18. In John 1:3 it says, "All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made."
If I were the devil, if I were the devil, if I were the prince of darkness, I'd want to engulf the whole world in darkness, and I'd have a third of its real estate and 4/5 of its population, but I wouldn't be happy until I had seized the ripest apple on the tree, thee. So I'd set about, however necessary, to take over the United States. I'd subvert the churches first. I'd begin with a campaign of whispers. With the wisdom of a serpent, I would whisper to you as I whispered to Eve, "Do as you please." To the young, I would whisper that the Bible is a myth. I would convince them that man created God instead of the other way around. I would confide that what's bad is good and what's good is square. And the old I would teach to pray after me, "Our Father, which art in Washington." And then I'd get organized. I'd educate authors in how to make lurid literature exciting so that anything else would appear dull and uninteresting. I'd threaten TV with dirtier movies and vice versa. I'd peddle narcotics to whom I could. I'd sell alcohol to ladies and gentlemen of distinction. I'd tranquilize the rest with pills. If I were the devil, I'd soon have families at war with themselves, churches at war with themselves, and nations at war with themselves, until each in its turn was consumed. And with promises of higher ratings, I'd have mesmerizing media fanning the flames. If I were the devil, I would encourage schools to refine young intellects, but neglect to discipline emotions. Just let those run wild. Until before you knew it, you'd have to have drug-sniffing dogs and metal detectors at every schoolhouse door. Within a decade, I'd have prisons overflowing. I'd have judges promoting pornography. Soon I could evict God from the courthouse, then from the schoolhouse, and then from the houses of Congress. And in his own churches, I would substitute psychology for religion and deify science. I would lure priests and pastors into misusing boys and girls and church money. If I were the devil, I'd make the symbol of Easter an egg and the symbol of Christmas a bottle. If I were the devil, I'd take from those who have and give to those who wanted until I had killed the incentive of the ambitious. And what'll you bet? I couldn't get whole states to promote gambling as the way to get rich. I would caution against extremes in hard work, in patriotism, in moral conduct. I would convince the young that marriage is old-fashioned, that swinging is more fun, that what you see on TV is the way to be. And thus I could undress you in public, and I could lure you into bed with diseases for which there is no cure. In other words, if I were the devil, I'd just keep right on doing what he's doing.
Today we're going to talk about what is the truth about our history. Where are we as a nation? What can we do about it? What can we do about our condition? Was our nation really founded as a Christian nation? Many are questioning whether that's true, and they want to change history. Well, in the Supreme Court case of 1892, the Church of the Holy Trinity versus the U.S., they concluded that our laws and our institutions must be based upon and embody the teachings of the Redeemer of mankind, and it's impossible that it should be otherwise. And in this sense, and to this extent, our civilization and our institutions are emphatically Christian. The court also quoted 87 different historical precedents to back up its decision from the Founding Fathers, the acts of the Founding Fathers, and acts of Congress. George Washington's farewell address says, "Of all the habits and dispositions which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. In vain would that man claim the tribute of patriotism who should labor to subvert these great pillars." Benjamin Franklin, who wasn't necessarily known to be a great Christian, but certainly had a belief in God, said, "I have lived, sir, a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men." I firmly believe this, and I also believe that without his concurring aid, we shall succeed in this political building no better than the builders of Babel. We shall be divided by our little partial local interest. Our projects will be confounded, and we ourselves shall become a reproach. I therefore beg leave to above that henceforth prayers imploring the assistance of heaven and its blessings on our deliberations be held in this assembly every morning before we proceed to business. That was Benjamin Franklin at the Constitutional Convention of 1787. Alex de Tocqueville wrote a book in 1835 called Democracy in America. He was a Frenchman. The Americans combined the notions of Christianity and liberty so intimately in their minds that it is impossible to make them conceive one without the other. The religious atmosphere for the country was the first thing that struck me upon my arrival in the U.S. In France, I had seen the spirits of religion and freedom almost always marching in opposite directions, but in America I found them intimately linked together and joined and reigned over the same land. Religion should therefore be considered as the first of their political institutions. From the start, politics and religion have agreed and have not since ceased to do so. Of 15,000 writings of the Founding Fathers, 94% of the quotes were based on the Bible or a direct quote. 70% of signers were abolitionists. That's worth noting with the cancel culture that we live in today, and trying to portray that all white people are racist is simply not true. We've been blessed in America because we put our faith in God. Just look at some of the quotes we've adopted throughout our history. One nation under God, in God we trust. The 10 Commandments on courthouses. God bless America. Prayer in schools and Congress and elsewhere. And we've supported Israel. We are a Christian-founded nation. Secularization of church and state is the ultimate goal. In the U.S. Capitol, the worship services were held from 1809 and 1817. James Madison and Thomas Nelson both attended those worship services. So, where are we as a nation today? Let's look at a spiritual snapshot of America and the world. We see in the Lord's Prayer, Jesus said, "Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." So how are we doing with that prayer? Let's look. Where are we winning? And where are we losing? Well, in China, 1.4 billion people live in China today. In 1900, only 1 in 27 were estimated to be Christians. But in 1950, 1 million Christians were estimated. And in 2013, 100 million. So some believe that it was 30,000 people a day coming to Christ, and over 200 million Christians reported in China. Some believe it's even way higher than that. How about world poverty? In 1990, 1 in 3 were in extreme poverty, but today, in 2013, 1 in 5, and I'm sure that is even better today as we do this recording. So why is America in trouble? Well, we're the frog in the kettle. The water has been heating up, and we haven't noticed how much it's been heating, to the point that one day we're going to wake up and it's going to be all over. Several years ago, Barna did a study in 2019 on worldview and found that only 19% of Christians in the U.S. had a biblical worldview, and those born between 1977 and 2010, only 3% had a biblical worldview. We're one generation from a completely secular society. In 2012, Barna had a research that found that 84% of Christian 18 to 29-year-olds admit that they have no idea how the Bible applies to their field or professional interests. This shows a lack of equipping and training inside the local church of helping us understand the aspect of the priestly call of every believer in all that we do. We see a covenant of tolerance today. I won't tell you what to do as long as you don't tell me what to do. That's the sentiment of many of the young people today. All the while, we're killing 61 million babies, and even New York in 2019 said it was okay to kill a baby even the day before she was born. How sad is that? We're actually seeing Baal worship as it was in the Old Testament, where we sacrifice babies. We're losing our Christian liberties and making conservative values hate speech. The devil always twists truth. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter, it says in Isaiah 5:20. You see, culture is often built on a lie rooted in an antichrist spirit. And God has called you and I to proclaim the truth to make us free in John 8:32. Because truth doesn't change because the culture doesn't like it. John 14:6 says, I am the truth, the way, and the life. And that's true always. Our nation's motto is in God we trust, but many times we can't pray at public events. We've seen capitalism wane in its belief that it's the right way for Americans. A Gallup poll revealed that 57% of those between ages 18 and 29 viewed capitalism positively in 2016, but only 45% felt the same way in 2018. Democrats no longer hold a positive view of capitalism, while nearly 60% of them feel good about socialism. Could you ever imagine being confused about your gender or want to change your gender? Satan is attacking human beings' identity. 100 million born-again Christians live in America, and 50 million were registered to vote. But only 25 million showed up to vote. These are often confused on how to vote for or who to vote for. Many liberals don't like each other, but they're willing to work together for their collective cause, while Christians on the opposite side like each other but refuse to work together. Lance Wallnau said, while we preached and prayed, the left discipled the nation. Our candlestick is in jeopardy of being removed. Remember, therefore, from where you have fallen, repent and do the first works, or else I will come to you quickly and remove your lampstand from its place unless you repent. Revelation 2:5. Could you have ever imagined you would see the America we are now seeing? Our spiritual foundations are cracked. 1 Corinthians 3:11 says, for no other foundation can anyone lay than that which is laid, which is Jesus Christ. We need to understand the times we live in, like the sons of Issachar, who had an understanding of the times to know what Israel ought to do. We live in a perfect storm. Liberalization of America, the U.S. economy debt, critical race theory, Washington leadership crisis, sanctuary cities, gender confusion, the Christian liberties being assaulted, the moral issues, the gay issue, the open borders, the rise of socialism and communism, In our own city, anti-Semitism is growing. How in the world did we get to this place? Well, it began in the Old Testament, in Deuteronomy 7 and 8, the Bible says that there are blessings and cursings when a nation obeys or disobeys God, and that's what we can see taking place today. We can see how we're beginning to see the judgment of God based on our disobedience. We're moving from being a moral nation and a spiritual culture to a secular culture, and we're seeing the family break down. We saw education begin to change in 1857 when the National Education Association began to kick God out of the schools and began to bring liberalization of the schools. And today we see our universities totally lost to the liberal agenda. And then we see in the 1930s where we abandoned Hollywood, and Hollywood was taken over by the devil himself. And then 1953, Playboy magazine was introduced where anything goes, and we've seen an incredible liberalization of the sexual roles and just sexuality in our nation. And then in 1963, we saw prayer removed from schools. We kicked God out. We began to see violence show up in schools. We began to see worse test scores, and it's continuing to decline today. And then in 1973, we introduced abortion, Roe versus Wade, and then the gay agenda in 1997, where we saw the first public kiss between two women on national television. And then in 2000, we saw relativism come into our country through our young people. And then in 2015, the ultimate. We changed the idea of marriage between two consenting male and female people to anybody goes, male, male, female, female. So we've moved from being a moral government to a civil government. Time is running out, though. If America continues on its current course, God is going to have to apologize to Sodom and Gomorrah. Is it too late for America? God said if there were 10 righteous in Sodom and Gomorrah, He would spare it. All right, what can we do about it? Well, in 1975, Bill Bright and Lauren Cunningham met for the very first time. And when they met, God showed them that there were 7 spheres of arts and entertainment, business, economy, education, family, government, media, religion. These were the areas that most define the culture, and that we needed to shift the culture. If we were going to have a chance of winning the culture, it was going to have to be through these spheres.
It was August 1975, and the Lord had given me that day a list of things that I had never thought about before. He said, this is the way to reach America and nations for God.
In every city of the world, an unseen battle rages for dominion over God's creation and the souls of people. This battle is fought on 7 strategic fronts, looming like mountains over the culture to shape and influence its destiny. Over the years, the church slowly retreated from its place of influence on these mountains, leaving a void now filled with darkness. When we lose our influence, we lose the culture, and when we lose the culture, we fail to advance the kingdom of God. And now, a generation stands in desperate need. It's time to fight for them and take back these mountains of influence. The mountain of government, where evil is either restrained or endorsed. The mountain of education, where truths or lies about God and His creation are taught. The mountain of media, where information is interpreted through the lens of good or evil. The mountain of arts and entertainment, where values and virtue are celebrated or distorted. The mountain of religion, where people worship God in spirit and truth or settle for a religious ritual. the mountain of family, where either the blessing or a curse is passed on to successive generations. And the one mountain they all depend on, the mountain that fuels and funds all the other mountains. The mountain of business, where people build for the glory of God or the glory of man, where resources are consecrated for the kingdom of God or captured for the powers of darkness. Those who lead this mountain control what influences our culture. The last 50 years, we've seen the most rapid moral decline in history. The culture we inherited from our forefathers is disintegrating before our eyes. What kind of world are we leaving for our children and grandchildren? As long as the business mountain is held by enemies of the gospel, funding for the other mountains will always be constrained, and any efforts to advance the kingdom of God will be hindered. Imagine God's people reclaiming their cities and government, in the arts and entertainment, in the media, in education, in the family, in religious influence, but only limited by their imagination and not by a lack of finances. It's possible, but first, we must take back the mountain of business. God's move to take this mountain back has already begun. Thousands and thousands of business leaders in every major city across the nation are filling arenas to learn from business leaders and hear the gospel of Christ. 90% of people working in the marketplace believe in God. 78% believe spirituality and business mix. 70% say that because of their faith, they find meaning and purpose in life. There are over 56 million Bible-believing Christians working in the marketplace, a vast army of God waiting to be truly engaged in the battle. Yet this strategic army and battlefront has largely been left ignored by the church. More than 90% of church members do not feel they are being equipped or trained by the church to apply biblical faith in their day-to-day life.
The business mountain is so strategic because that is the place of influence. When you look at culture, so much of culture is defined by what happens in business.
If we would use the wealth of the world to bless the world, and bless it not only to distribute to the needy that which they need.
When you bring economy and economic benefit to a nation or a culture, then you have influence in that culture.
People, as they're transformed, who will transform all the spheres of society.
It is time to reclaim the 7 mountains and bring the life of God back into our culture.
So in 1977 through 2004, we saw a proliferation of the recognition of faith in the marketplace, of Christians in the marketplace, and the need for God to be in the marketplace. And Billy Graham said, I believe that one of the great next moves of God is going to be through believers in the workplace. And so we saw the movement of God and the reemergence of this 7 mountain or 7 sphere introduction into the culture, and realized that this had to be a strategy. We realized that the family is the most important mountain, where emotional health and well-being is important, and it shows up on every mountain. Media, education, arts, and entertainment define the worldview and the beliefs and values, and our government, where we adopt and interpret and enforce laws, and business and economy and prosperity, and the church, where God, morality, and values are promoted. Isaiah 2:2 says, Now it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow to it. Culture-shaping issues, the media and arts and entertainment often shape these things. So many issues that are in our nation today that are shaping our nation to where we're going. What we need to realize is the 7M movement, or the 7 spheres, whatever you want to call it, is not dominionism. It's not a theology. It's simply a strategy to be salt and light in the culture, to fulfill God's mandate for us to pray the Lord's Prayer to bring heaven on earth. Abraham Kuyper, the Prime Minister in the Netherlands from 1901 to 1905, said, It is, no single piece of our mental world is to be hermetically sealed off from the rest, And there's not a square inch in the whole domain of our human existence over which Christ is sovereign over all does not cry, mine. Culture is defined by only 3 to 5% of people who operate at the top of a cultural mountain. You see, Randall Collins, a sociologist and author of Discovery of Society, said U.S. culture has been defined by less than 500 intellectual cultural philosophers who influenced 7 gates and supporting networks since our birth as a nation. The gay rights movement is a testimony to the use of only 3 to 5% of leadership at the top of a cultural mountain to be able to shift it. You see, they used this strategy to shift America's view of this issue. It began in 1987 when 175 gay activists met in Virginia. 2 Harvard attorneys brought it together. And one of the amazing things they say in their book is that they admit that gays are not born gay. And that's the reason that they've been so successful, is even though they believe that, they will never say that. Because if it's a moral issue, it's a lifestyle preference. And they could never get legislation on something like that. So they had to create a lie in order to people believe that people are born gay and turn it into a civil rights issue. The entire premise has been built on a lie. And so we see this in their book where they say, we argue that for all practical purposes, gays should be considered to have been born gay, even though sexual orientation for most humans seems to be the product of a complex interaction between innate predispositions and environmental factors during childhood and early adolescence. They realized that having kinky in-your-face parades did not endear them to the public. They took a new approach in which they attempted to make gayness be part of the mainstream. But because of their spirit of rejection, they require everyone to accept their lifestyle, and they're going to remove God from the public discourse, and they're going to make you accept their agenda, because the spirit of rejection can become radicalized in an effort to be loved and accepted. There are people desiring love, and they need a change in their life in order to get free. So what are we up against? Dr. Lance Wallnau several years ago mentioned that we're up against something called a Thunder Road movement that the left built after the losses of the elections of 2000. They realized they needed to rebuild their movement, and many political players came together to develop a strategy to fill the voids in the leftist movement. They developed a firm called Thunder Road Group to evaluate the needs to the left and ways to fund those needs. Over the next 10 years, the most powerful political coalition in history was built and funded by coordinated giving. They surveyed the strengths of the conservative movement and identified the existing organizations that were effective against these strengths and recruited them to Thunder Road, where funding and strategy were coordinated. They created new organizations where none existed and where weakness appeared in the conservative camp that could be exploited. Leftist strategies and financiers realized in order to effect change in America, they would need several critical resources. They included a think tank, a media operation, opposition research, a go-to effort to sign up voters, funding sources, and social technology. They've been very effective, and George Soros has been right in the center of it, giving millions to this effort. And so we see an open society grant writing for 37 countries, $18 billion transferred in 2017, and $30 billion to date. And so we see all these organizations that are formed to defeat the conservative movement. Even entertainment has joined in. Late-night humor has become a tool for propaganda for the left. And Soros's rented evangelicals concept, where he gives money to certain types of evangelicals that can be bought and manipulated. What's our answer to the Thunder Road strategy? Well, the left works together, but we're disjointed. We need to come together. We've been losing ground because we're unwilling to work together. I've discovered that over the years there's some key components to culture influence. The first is prayer, like Daniel. And then we need to equip our leaders to understand what it means to be called and be a change agent, to solve problems, and to have a 7-sphere strategy through networks and collaboration. So we need to pray the Lord's Prayer that heaven will be brought on earth. Why was Jesus so influential? Well, he solved problems. He solved Peter's fishing problem. He solved Peter's tax problem. He fed 5,000 people when there was no food. He solved the blind man's seeing problem. He solved the prostitute's problem and kept her from being stoned. Can we be trusted with a problem to bring a God solution to it? That's what England's Wilberforce did. He had 69 world-changing initiatives when he and 18 other individuals came together. He came to Christ at 28, but John Newton encouraged him to stay in politics. He wrote the hymn Amazing Grace, and he did stay in politics and had great influence in the nation. He abolished slavery after 30 years of work. And so we now need alliance. We need alliances in the 7 spheres. When we are seen as servants who have no agenda except to love, we are given access to the heart of the community. Daniel had covenant partners. He says, "My decision is firm," his boss says. "If you do not make known the dream to me and its interpretation, you shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made an ash heap." Then Daniel went to his house and made the decision known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, that they might seek mercies from the God of heaven concerning this secret. And as a result, they solved the problem, and they were given victory and favor with their king. So, God tells us 5 things to do. And he said to them, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature." Mark 16:15. He says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart." Matthew 22:37. He says to pray and humble yourself. "If my people are called by my name, will humble themselves and pray and seek my face, turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and heal their land." He tells us to unify, that we might be one as the Father and he are one. John 17:21. And then he says in Matthew 6:8 to bring heaven on earth. So we're to go, we're to love, we're to pray, we're to unify, and we're to act. A great door for effective work has opened to me, and there are many who oppose me, it says in 1 Corinthians 16:9. In 1857, Jeremiah Lanphier was sent by his church down to Wall Street and told to start a prayer meeting. 6 people showed up the first day, but within 6 months, 30,000 people were meeting for prayer. Over 2 million salvations came as a result of that revival. You see, culture change should be a fruit, not a goal. That's what happened when Jesus ministered to the woman at the Samaritan well. And so she shared the gospel with those in the community, and a revival came through Jesus. So why did David and Daniel and Joseph have influence? They solved a major problem. You see, culture doesn't care who solves their problem. They just want their problem solved. If you solve their problem, you will have influence. How did Daniel change everything? Well, there was a problem. His employer said, "Tell me my dream, interpret, or you and all your administration will die." Well, he supernaturally told him the dream and the interpretation. So he solved the king's problem and theirs. You see, lives that were saved, God's name was protected, and financial increase came for Daniel and his friends. How did Paul transform culture? 1 Corinthians 2:4 says, "And my speech and my preaching were not with wise and persuasive words of human wisdom, but in a demonstration of the Spirit and of power, that your faith should not be in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God." The conclusion is that culture is transformed when the presence and power of God is released through his people supernaturally in every cultural mountain. It begins with prayer because he must show up. Jesus was one with the Father, and he had spiritual authority, but he never reached for the power, the earthly power, or the political power. You see, humility leads to unity, and unity leads to spiritual authority, and authority leads to influence. We must also engage the culture to influence. You know, we did a conference years ago at Harvard, and we were picketed by the gay community and the Muslim community. Every day we had these picketers in front of our conference, and it was quite an event. We had 10 speakers, and we were on the topic of community transformation. But we never said anything negative about this group of people, but they thought that we were bigots, and so they tried to shut us down, but they were unsuccessful. And we ended up meeting with many of the organizers after that meeting. They came in and talked with us, and it was an amazing time where a Harvard professor moderated our conversation. And he told them, he said, I've listened to this conference today. We'd be glad to have this conference anytime at Harvard. They never said anything about you guys, and so you need to apologize for wrongfully judging them. Well, that opened a bridge into their community, and we were able to meet with many of them that night. Even though we didn't agree with their accusations, we were able to respectfully disagree. And that's what Jesus did. He didn't condemn people as much as built bridges into people's lives. And so that's what we need to do. Proclaim this among the nations, prepare for war, wake up the mighty men, let all the men of war draw near, let them come up, beat your plowshares into swords, and your pruning hooks into spears. Those are agricultural instruments, and they're being transformed in order for a war of love. Let the weak say, I am strong. Assemble and come, all you nations, and gather together all around. Cause your mighty ones to go down there, O Lord. Joel 3, 9 through 11. That's an end-time verse of what we can see. You see, we had an International Culture Shapers Summit in 2019 in Washington. 350 leaders came together, and we strategized about what we could do. And so I encourage you to visit our website at cultureshaperssummit.com to listen to all of those presentations. It was a powerful lineup of culture shapers. So just go to cultureshaperssummit.com to hear some of those talks. That led to some of what we're doing today. Take a look at this video that gives us a time line of revival throughout the world over the last several hundred years, and what we believe is the next revival to come. The Great Awakening Project is one of our new initiatives. We hope that you'll check that out at gapmovement.com, and that will allow you to engage and join the Army to bring revival to our nation. We have the influence if we will use it. You see, in the last 3 presidential elections, 17 million evangelical Christians were either not registered to vote, about 9 million, or were registered but did not turn out to vote, roughly 8 million. Evangelicals make up approximately 26% of eligible voters in the U.S., or about 52 million. So, is your name known in heaven? Is there a poster in hell with your picture on it? Are you a threat to the kingdom of darkness? Someone who esteemed the disciples thought they wanted to be like the disciples, but a demon knew differently. And the evil spirit answered and said, Jesus I know, and Paul I know, but who are you? Acts 19:15. I hope that you're a threat to the kingdom of darkness. So, let's continue the conversation. If you're not part of Today God is First, get our devotional free, todaygodisfirst.com.
Let's face it, we all want to make a difference. We want to live for Christ. We want our work to have meaning deep down. We all want to live a larger story to make a difference in the world. But how do we do this? It doesn't just happen. We must invest in our spiritual and professional life that involves spiritual mentoring and training. But where do we go to get that kind of spiritual mentoring and professional training? Is it at church, a conference, a school? The Change Agent Master Mentor Program is the answer to that question, founded by Os Hillman. He is a pioneer in marketplace ministry and has had a 40-year advertising and business career, working with clients like American Express, Steinway Pianos, Thomas Nelson Publishers, and a host of other successful companies. He understands the challenge of living for Christ in a pressure-packed business environment. He created the Change Agent Master Mentor Program to help leaders. Us will help you realize your dream of being successful in your career and having an influence on your world. The Change Agent Master Mentor Program is designed for you to realize your larger story, to understand your purpose, to learn and apply your faith life to your work life from us and other proven workspace leaders who are doing it. Our online course and group mentoring will help you become God's change agent, to be a cultural influencer and succeed in your work-life call, and grow in your relationship with God and with other members of the Change Agent Master Mentor Program. Come join us. Let's influence the world together. www.camastermentor.com.
The Change Agent Master Mentor Program is very affordable at $19 a month. We hope that you'll join us in that program and become God's change agent in the culture. God bless. Have a great day. And let's bring him back to America.